Welcome to the Observe Day podcast, the show where we celebrate the days that matter. From holidays to meaningful observances, we bring you inspiring conversations, stories, and ideas to make each day count. Whether it's raising awareness, learning something new, or simply sparking joy, this is your space to explore the calendar in a whole new way. I'm your host, Wisdom Okonkwo, and I'm excited to share today's observance with you. Let's dive in. Welcome to Observe Day, where we celebrate meaningful moments and the people who inspire them. In honor of National a Read a New Book Month, I am joined by David Ask, an entrepreneur, inventor, coach, and author whose mission is to help people discover who they are before chasing what they do. From bringing innovative products into thousands of stores to coaching leaders through identity first transformation to writing his upcoming book, The Guardians of Grit. David's story is about grit, resilience, and awakening purpose. Today, we'll dive into the role books play in shaping identity, sparking growth, and raising the next generation with uncrushable resilience. Welcome to the podcast, David.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here with you.
Yeah. David, as we celebrate National Reading a New Book Month, can you share a book that profoundly shaped your life or perspective?
Of course, as being a Christian, there's no question that the Bible is, really, really had the most effect on me. And at the
Yes.
same time, there's obviously quite a few other books that have. And in recent years, in fact, um, I guess the one that I just got done reading um, recently was a book called Who Not How, and it's basically a book that helps you to understand that you really need a wider network of people in your sphere to help you accomplish the things that you want to accomplish, and
Yeah.
not necessarily learn how to do everything. And it sounds kind of simple, and at the same time, it's a really profound read, and really helped me try to sit on the right seat on the bus, as they say, and and get off the wrong seat on the bus in my own life and business, and get the right people around me.
Yeah. Wow. You've worked on the thanks for that recommendation, Who Not How. I'll definitely check out the book.
Yeah.
You've worked on The Guardians of Grit. How has the process of writing changed your own understanding of resilience and authenticity?
Oh man, it's such a great question. I So two things, if I'm being honest. I'm probably this week I'm sending my book to the editor, and
Okay.
I've been working on Guardians of Grit for almost 2 years,
Wow.
and it is, yeah, it's one of the hardest things I've ever done. I'm a musician, and I've recorded several records, and all kinds of songs and this and that, and that's a challenge. But I tell you, to write a nonfiction book in a world where I'm writing this for fathers and sons, and there might be hundreds of books out there that are written for dads, and I feel like I've got a different perspective on some things. And yeah, it's been one of the biggest challenges of my life, and at the same time, I feel so passionate about it. And we get that word passion from the word suffer, and it's like, what am I willing to suffer for? And
Yeah.
it's a so I'm very passionate about this. And to your other question, regarding grit, Angela Duckworth wrote the book Grit, and she's kind of probably what you would consider the world's most authority on grit right now. I think she's a Stanford professor, if I remember right. And so she defines grit, kind of simply like this idea of doing something difficult over a long period of time, because what you're shooting for, as it were, is worth fighting for. It's kind of this idea of staying power, and
Yeah.
it's with something. And the fascinating thing, though, is I learned there's a difference between grit and resilience, and a lot of times we lump those two things together, and then we also, of course, we don't understand what is true grit or true resilience. In fact, there's a couple of movies called True Grit. But so resilience, is simply this idea of bouncing back, quickly. If someone is resilient and they get knocked down, or whether that's literally or metaphorically, they get up quicker. Wow. Whereas grit is this idea of kind of steadfastness, staying power of doing something over a long period.
Yeah. Before we dive deeper, I'd love to invite you to join the Observe Day newsletter. Every week, I send you highlights of upcoming observances, creative ways to celebrate, and behind the scenes extras from the shows. It's the perfect way to stay inspired and never miss a meaningful moment. Sign up today at observeday.com/join. That is observeday.com/join. Now, let's get back to the conversation. Yeah.
Time. And so in the book, I just unpack how do you really develop, internal grit and resilience versus external, or what they say, extrinsic grit or resilience.
Yeah. Oh, bless you. Many people struggle to make time for reading. What advice would you give to someone who wants to reignite a reading habit in the middle of a busy life?
Yeah, I regret that I didn't really start reading much until I was in my 30s, and I'm 51 now. I would say that I think it was I heard someone else quoting this person, but they said you are the same person a year from now, but for the books you read and the people you meet. It's a meaning that we need outside influence. I think we need to be careful, that we're not listening to things that are not productive or not true. But largely we are transformed, by the renewing of our mind, and we really need, to gain understanding and gain wisdom. Of course, when someone takes the time, whether it's fiction or not, honestly, there are some fiction books that can change your life. I think of like Lord of the Rings or something like that, or C.S. Lewis's writings. But there's a lot of nonfiction books out there that, if you were to read just a few books on a particular subject, you would, almost become an expert because you're standing on
Yeah.
their shoulders. So I think it's probably, one of the most, besides the people you hang out with, I think reading books is probably the most helpful thing you can do.
Well, one of the things you teach is the quote, never start with why, start with who, which is kind of contradictory because there's a what's the word? There's a common quote from Simon Sinek that, oh, and the book on it, so start with why. And here you
Right.
are telling us never start with why, start with who. I would ask what what's the explanation behind this bold stand?
Yeah. So, and of course, Simon's book is fantastic, and I'm being a bit, a bit funny here. I'm not. It's not like I'm picking a fight with him. He's
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
a wiser man than I am. But so I'll paint the picture this way. When we grow up, so when we're younger, we're largely taking, our um, our cues, as it were, from our parents and older siblings and people around us. And as we get older, we tend to, I guess maybe how about this? Our why, becomes whatever their why is because we don't know any different. And as we get
Yeah.
older, psychologists call this notion, or this, there's a process in life called self-actualization, meaning, typically when you're a teenager and maybe into your early 20s, you go through this process of, just really defining what do I believe, versus my parents. And of course, sometimes that process can be, um, a bit, oh, a bit tricky, to put it lightly. Sometimes there's a lot
Yeah.
of, drama with teenagers and, um, you know, and so on. But the interesting thing about that is that if you don't go through the process of building self awareness, meaning you don't know who you are, what do I love? What do I hate? What breaks my heart? What is it that, I believe is right and wrong? What do I believe is the type of impact I want to have on other people? What are my values? Like what matrix of values am I making decisions through? And if you don't have clear understanding on what those are for yourself, well, guess what? Your why might be someone else's. It might be somebody you respect. It might
Yeah.
be a political cause that you just, because you just need something to kind of latch onto for purpose. It's really important to build the self awareness to, and I think it was Seth Godin who says, people like us do things like this. It's
Yeah.
what do you do? What do you care about? You and I mentioned the word passion. what are you willing to suffer for? And if you really
Yeah.
haven't driven a stake in the ground and defined those things clearly on who you are, your why might be someone else's why.
Yeah. Well, and I guess the next question would be, how do books and stories help people discover their true identity?
Yeah. So here, I guess we probably need to, define, the word identity,
Okay.
before we, maybe move further. So I think in our culture, there's so many of those words like authenticity and identity and things like that that have been largely misunderstood. And
Yeah.
my friend Dr. Andy Garrett, who's a clinical psychologist, he introduced me just to a very simple kind of a definition. So we'll start with authenticity. Like, who are you authentically? Well, guess what? That word authenticity comes from the word author. And, so we largely have to, I guess, start with a presupposition that we didn't create ourselves, right? And that kind of
Wow.
goes without saying, right? I didn't make me.
Yeah.
And so, and it's a popular, thing. Like, I didn't choose my skin color or my eye color or my hair color. I didn't choose, the country that I grew up in. I mean, I think you said you're in Nigeria. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And here I am in Nashville, Tennessee. And, we don't choose, what family we're born into and all that kind of thing. And so what's fascinating though is when it comes down to even our own personalities, those of us who have had children, especially, we see it really quickly that, our kids come out of, the womb very hardwired. They're very, very different from one another. And you can tell their personalities are very hardwired at a very early age. Of course, there is, this idea of nurture, versus nature, but,
Hello?
and there are things that influence us, but our personalities are very hardwired. They're very given, they're given to us, just like our skin color and everything else. We get to choose what we do with those things, and we can expand and grow, but largely our personalities are very given to us. So I mean, real quick, and so this word identity is what? Well, you're identifying and you want, all of those things. And when you start to identify that, well, guess what? You have an identity. You've identified those things.
Oh, my identity. And now that we've defined identity, what role does books and stories play in finding that what that is?
And forgive me that you said you're asking what books or stories have helped to identify
Yeah.
those.
So my question is, I'm looking for the role of books and stories in helping people discover their true identity.
Yeah, yeah. So, of course, you when we look at, what do you believe about eternal things, right? It's I think there are two questions that we really need to answer in life that probably make the biggest difference, and that is, the question of who am I and what do I believe God, the one who made me and gave me my spirit and my soul, what does he think about me? And I think it's really, really important, to have a bedrock understanding of those two questions. Who am I? And what does God think of me? So, of course,
Oh,
I think that as a Christian, we're made in the image of God. And that
yeah.
same God, of course, has given us clues, right? He's the one who made lightning and tigers and hurricanes and tornadoes and polar bears and koala bears and puppies. And so we can see his nature, in nature, as it were, and we can see the authenticity in other people, thus by kind of looking upward, as it were, toward the author. So we can start to see his nature, and I think that's where I start anyway. Everybody has to make that decision for themselves. But we can.
Yeah.
There's a lot of clues there, and of course, there's been so many books that have been written, on purpose and identity and stories. And I'll be honest, I think that there are stories. I think there are probably fictional stories when I think about like the Chronicles of Narnia, or even Lord of the Rings and some of these big epic tales that actually help reveal a bit more about who we are and why we do the things we do than necessarily scientific books. But although it's really nice to have some that are a bit. spelled out, as it were, by like I mentioned, my friend Dr. Andy Garrett is a clinical psychologist, and he has helped me, a ton really understand some of these concepts on a very basic level.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for breaking down the your understanding of identity, and also
Mm.
how it relates to reading books, for helping us discover our own true identity. Um, one of you said grit and resilience are different.
Hmm.
Can you help us differentiate?
And forgive me, say that one more time.
You said that grit and resilience are different. Can you help us differentiate?
Yeah, yeah. So I think this grit, and I kind of love even the word. It just sounds like sandpaper. It's this idea of there's something
Yeah.
under your feet. Kind of metaphorically. So we're talking about our our character and our our spirit, as it were. There's something under our feet, metaphorically, that gives us traction. It's like the so what if there were things, that if each grain on a piece of sandpaper was something, what would that be? Well, it would probably be, what do we believe, our values are, right? It's like, I'm going to do something difficult over a long period of time because what I value most of all, over, whether it's, excuse me, a week or a month or a year later, is worth fighting for. It's worth struggling for. It's worth going after. So I think grit is really, this intrinsic, internally motivated grit is really about your values and what do you believe is worth fighting for. And where resilience is, this idea of just bouncing back quickly. So if I'm a resilient person and excuse me, it's one of those ideas that where I just happen to get up more quickly than not, because I'm not getting up, necessarily, because I'm embarrassed. I get up, more quickly and head back into the storm, as it were, because I know who I am, what I value, and what I'm fighting for.
Oh, I see it now. I see the difference now. Okay. Over the course of the conversation, we've mentioned your book, The Guardians of of Great.
Hmm.
Can you tell us about the book?
Sure. Yeah, yeah. Thank you for asking too. And so I'm really, really passionate about fathers. I really believe that if you look around our world, that you can pretty much trace every problem in our societies back to the fact that men, for one reason or another, haven't led well. They haven't loved well. They haven't, led with kindness and conviction and clarity. They haven't led through a value system, and they weren't raised right. And so, how do we know that's true? And I was telling a friend of mine the other day, there are a few things, that we will never hear someone say in this world. And I'm being kind of funny here, but like, for instance, gee, I wish I couldn't play the piano. Or how about, gee, I wish I didn't finish my college degree. And how about
Yeah.
this? Gee, I wish my dad didn't lead with such kindness, conviction and clarity. You're never going to
Yeah.
hear that. And how about, even a wife? Gee, I wish my husband didn't lead with such nobility and kindness and conviction and clarity. So what
Yeah.
I believe, life is about, if you want to build a life that's beautiful for you and, maybe a family, you have to be gritty. You have to be, someone who is willing to stay in the fire and fight for something. And if you don't know why you're doing that, if you don't have an internal, an intrinsically motivated, set of values and convictions and so on, it's going to be much easier to give up. But boy, I tell you what, it's amazing when someone really understands who they are and why they're fighting for something, on a very granular level. Boy, you can really build a beautiful life. And so that's my book is all about building intrinsic motivation as a father and being able to, in essence, introduce their sons to themselves so that they understand, earlier in life, people like us do things like this. Well, why? It's because you're fighting for something you believe in.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for um this book. And you just mentioned that you send out the final drafts to your editor. And for me, what do you hope readers will take away from The Guardians of Grit? not just as parents, but as individuals seeking their own breakthrough.
Yeah. So, one of my favorite quotes is by Benjamin Disraeli, and he says, "The greatest good you can do for another is not to share with him your riches, but to reveal to him his own." And I would say, to anybody, whether it's a wife or a mom, of course, a man. My my buddy David Ash called me one day and he said, "David, you're made of awesome." And I just got a big smile on my face. And I just want people to know that you are made of something spectacular, and it's incredibly unique, right? We've got a fingerprint and a retina and DNA that is absolutely unique, and what God authored in you is fantastic. And when you
Yeah,
start to identify that, and then of course, hold up a mirror, to your son and help him to identify those things and run in his lane. Man, it's amazing how good life can get.
yeah. Oh, thank you so much.
Hmm.
Where can listeners learn more about the book and also get a copy when it comes out?
Yeah, so it's funny. I'm launching a new website here soon. It's going to be a YouTube channel. It's going to be called theaskexperience.com. But right now, if you want to go to David Ask, my last name is pronounced Ask, but it's spelled like ask. So davidask.com.
davidask.com. Okay.
Yeah,
What about
David Ask.
davidaskmusic.com?
Yes, yeah, and it actually points there. Yep.
Okay, okay. Well, thank you so much, David. Just to repeat, listeners can connect with David, explore his upcoming book, The Guardians of Grit, and discover his other projects at davidask.com, davidaskmusic.com. There you will also find his coaching, music, and resources designed to help you uncover your identity and live authentically. Thank you so much, David.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
That's it for today's episode of the Observe Day podcast. Thank you for spending your time with us as we explore today's observance. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and share it with a friend who'd love to celebrate life's special days too. Don't forget to join the newsletter at observeday.com/join for more observance stories, tips, and updates. Until next time, keep finding meaning in every day.